All right. Welcome back to another episode of Small Business Chronicles. I am your serial entrepreneur and host, Brian Stone, and I love this show. We talk about business, small to medium sizes. We talk about all different kinds of industries. And look, regardless of where you're at in business, whether you're just starting out or you're about to scale yourself out, you've got to have some kind of exit strategy in mind, right? You have to make sure that you're actually building yourself to be saleable or even to be acquired. And my conversation today is actually going to be one for you because we're going to talk about mergers and acquisitions. And specifically, my guest is an expert in that field. So I'm actually meeting today with Brian Franco. He is the founder and CEO of Meritage Partners. And look, they've been in the game for a while, and they have been a part of and contributed to transactions exceeding 2 billion in enterprise value. So when I say that we're talking to someone who knows what they're talking about, you guys can believe it. I mean, the proof is in the numbers. So we won't delay any further. We'll jump right in. Brian, how are you today?
I'm excellent, Brian. And again, love the name, love the fact that our parents got the spelling correct with the I. No
Absolutely.
offense to the Brian's with the Y, but hey, it is what it is. I'm happy to be here, all jokes aside, and dive into details of what does the world of the capital markets look like, and what does that mean to entrepreneurs?
Yeah, well, and look, I mean, it's we've discussed this before with having exit strategy and risk mitigation and management. We've had lots of experts on our podcast, but most of the time we're talking about either family businesses or we're talking about smaller scale operationally, what happens internally.
Mhm.
But you have a wealth of experience within the M&A marketplace, right? So
Absolutely.
tell us a little bit about how you got into it, what your background is and why you're so effective at doing what it is that you do.
Absolutely. So my journey started as a young entrepreneur. I was 18. My father, he was an entrepreneur as well and real estate investor, and I could even go back further, even as a 10-year-old, joining him in meetings and just learning through osmosis by being around him. But fast forward to 18 when I became an entrepreneur, my father was involved in an accident, and so I was the oldest son in the family, so I stepped up into the ranks and helped dad with the company while he was healing and mending, and I did that. Went to school. I went to college, and I thought I was going to be a CPA. I also loved real estate just because my father saw him invest in that space as well. So I did study some law and specifically real estate law. Ended up getting my broker's license by age 20. Always had it, never really used it for purposes of, as in real estate, but more so as an investor. But coming out of that experience, of education, and I really focused and gravitated towards finance and accounting. And what I always appreciated was solving those puzzle pieces that you have in a company, and the nuances of KPIs and financial metrics. Because as we all know and we all hear, what you can't measure, you cannot improve. I like to use a phrase in M&A: if what gets measured gets multiplied. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But as you continue on in the journey, at age 23, I landed a position with a firm, a small boutique M&A advisory firm, and I was good at it. I was a kid. I didn't really understand, how well I was from a peer to peer basis. But at that time, I was the youngest certified business intermediary in the United States. It's since been that record's been beaten, but at that time, I was, and it was fun. It was exciting, and I started to have this vision of what is now Meritage Partners. And that vision was not just to meet the entrepreneur when they're ready to exit. My vision was to meet the entrepreneur wherever they were in terms of their journey. So if they were growing their business, if they got to some sort of critical mass, And typically the fuel that you need once you get to critical mass is capital. And then, once you hit that waypoint, then you're looking at an exit or an exit strategy, which comes in many flavors, and we'll talk about a few of those. But that's the vision that I had of Meritage Partners. So the firm that I left at age 26, this was in May of 2005. So in 2004, the firm that I left, I was 72% of the firm's revenues generated in 2004. So I kept that momentum. I started my firm 3 months before my wife and I were married in August. So I went, 3 months, without that level of income. I had to ramp everything up, and I did. So we bootstrapped it. We were young. We didn't know any better, and it was the best time I could have done this. At 45 here today, it'd be a lot harder to make that jump with 4 kids and a wife,
Sure.
and the lifestyle that we've created. So, but with that vision and with that pursuit, what we've created was Meritage Partners. And there again, we're working with clients up front to assess where they are from the standpoint of their business. And these assessments are financial as well as non-financial, because when I look at a client's case, and I could share some cases with you, we always look at and have the end in mind. So we're reverse engineering, where we intend to be, and we look at where we are today. Everything in between is the gap. So the question and the focus becomes, how do you fill that gap? So I'm sure you'll have listeners that are tuning in, and there are different stages of their entrepreneurial journey. They could be bootstrapping their first startup. They could be getting to a place where the business is now critical mass, and some of the shareholders that they have on the cap table are no longer participants in the business. Maybe they were never participants in the business. They were simply, or not simply, but they were capital in the beginning. And so as the business grows, so does the strategy. And as you position a company to be a market leader or best in class, the result is you're going to generate powerful revenues and meaningful profitability. And the same mindset that I'll pick on myself here, the same mindset I had when I started the firm is much different than the mindset that I have today. And entrepreneurs could say that about themselves when they reflect on that topic and subject. So there's a time and there's a place where you're going to reach a place where capital is needed to fuel the machine that you created to continue to grow and to continue to scale. Because if you're not scaling, you're stale. Your revenues are stagnant. And if you were a public company, a stagnant revenues, you might as well be losing revenue, because your stock value is likely declining if you're a public company. So why don't we think like public companies? And so this is what I'm here to talk about. And this is what we teach and what we preach and what we advise with our clients. So Brian, it all starts with that assessment. Where are they? And then we discover where do they want to be. And we'll show them, looking at 8 key metrics of their business, both financial and non-financial, where they need to be focused in terms of time and energy in order to round out their business. Because let's face it, I'm going to exit my business one day. You're going to exit your businesses one day. And in my experiences, there's a few scenarios, right? And I'll just name a few. And you have, of course, retirement. That's the beautiful way to go out, right? But you have burnout, you have partnership splits, you have divorce, and unfortunately, you have death. I've been at the closing table of transactions with our clients, private clients. We've sold them to larger public companies. We've sold our clients to larger private equity-backed institutions. And everyone's high-fiving and popping champagne and having a good old time. But I've also been at the closing table where the widowed wife was crying on my shoulder, thanking me for helping them get out of the business. because her husband died prematurely at age 54 of a heart attack. We've seen situations where a 40-year-old went home from his business on a Friday, was involved in a motorcycle accident over the weekend, and never came back again. He was a human vegetable from that moment on. So we're all going to exit. The question is how. I mean, we don't know. I don't know, right? But I know that I need to plan accordingly. And so this is where we start. And the actionable advice that we give from that assessment allows an entrepreneur to carefully grow and scale their companies to the critical mass that they desire, so that they could reach the expectation in terms of enterprise value on their way out of that business. Because our goal is to create generational wealth through these massive M&A strategies. And that's my journey. That's where we've been. That's what we've done, and that's where I am today. And we'd love to extend that, to the audience and to you. So, I mean, I'll kind of pause there, and because I gave a lot of information in this short segment, but if there's anything I could clarify, or any case studies I could share with you, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, well, I mean, and Brian, first of all, love that you are passionate about tackling that topic and that process, right? Because it is important. It's not just about, revenue. It's not just about some of the success you've had. It's about, as you said, I mean, we're all going to exit. Is it by design or is it by default, right? And I think a lot of people, because they don't know, I mean, maybe they have an understanding that they want to exit, but they don't know what it looks like. They struggle with where to start, right? Because I think the first question that you correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, the first question that anybody listening should be asking is it a time, is it a date, or is it a number? Right. Because
absolutely.
I mean, that's going to impact your strategy and what kind of conversations you need to be having. For most people, if it's by default, it's just a date, right? They're like, well, I only want to work X number of years. But that's not typically how great opportunity works, right? I mean, most people sell and then they move on to something else, right? So I think good businesses focus on the number.
They do. And that's what we unpack with the client to figure out what is that number. Now, yes, it could be a date, but the surprise element here is that the systems in which we created, I'm not going to say that we created the flux capacitor and made time travel possible, but we certainly we have processes and tools that we use to collapse time for our clients. Some clients will say, I want to be done by age 65. So I'll call you on my 64th birthday. No, that's too late. And we need to be planning at least a couple of years, 3 years ahead of time. Right. But there again, I mean, when you plan out your life as best as you can, because there's always going to be elements of surprise. But if you could have a plan, just as most of us are planning for retirement at some point, and we feed our 401ks and our SEP IRAs, and we're doing those things, right? But one of the biggest hidden assets, and I've talked to many wealth advisors, and when wealth advisors put together an asset pie chart, they're constantly and consistently estimating what the business's value is. I personally think and find that estimation is completely undervalued, and there's no faults in that, because it's a specialty service. It's a special focus that we have in determining what the value of that company is in the marketplace, and what is the market going to bear for that type of opportunity.
Well, and if you don't have that knowledge, then you tend to lean toward the conservative, right? Because
precisely.
nobody wants to overinflate a business potential if they don't have a proven model to actually have a predictive track.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So I'll give you two case studies that we're working on at the moment. One client of ours, she has a translation company and translation of language inside personal injury claims. Her business is doing great. she's making about $1.5 million to the bottom line every year, and she's selling the company, and she's selling the company because we actually sold her husband's company 4 years ago. And he's home and he's bored and he's wanting to travel the world. And he's like, hey, when are you going to join me? So she's got a beautiful business. She's done all the right things. We've advised her along the way, and she's ready for that exit. But what she found is that with the buyers groups that we're in negotiations with, there's so much value to her experience. And what I think is going to happen there is that she's going to sell the company, but I suspect that she's going to roll forward a small portion of equity to participate with the buyer group. But her role becomes what on the exit is the same role she had when she started the company, and that's business development. Right. So in a case study like that, I always say, Mr. and Mrs. Client, you're not selling your company. You're selling the things you no longer want to do in your company. And when you could couple capital or an investor with your business that's going to come in and fuel the business for further growth and scale. And if you have that opportunity to participate at some capacity on a go-forward basis, you have the luxury and opportunity to access that second bite of the apple, is what we say. And it's absolutely amazing to watch and to see.
Well, and we've seen that across the board in multiple successful, businesses where it's very common for a founder to fire themselves as operator, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Sometimes there's an equity exchange or a sale that happens, and sometimes not. But at some point, they realize that if they want the legacy of that business to continue forward, they have to remove themselves from it, at least partially.
And one of our questions in our assessment is, what would your business look like if you were to pick up right now, no planning, if you were to pick up right now after this assessment, because, play along with me, we're sitting in the middle of the assessment, and you don't show up for another 90 days. What does your business look like? And so we have options for them to choose multiple choice. And I'll tell you, owners and founders they're surprised with even how they answer their own question. And it creates this awareness that they've thought about, but they haven't thought about this topic in the way that we're provoking it, in the context that we're provoking that thought with that question. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that working yourself out of a job is key, because that's a difference between a business owner and an entrepreneur, right? A business owner is that they've created a job for themselves, whereas an entrepreneur, in my mind, the differentiation is that they have created a company or companies that it is not necessary for them to be in every single play-by-play of the day-to-day operation.
Well, and that's that shift, right? That's the trajectory that every entrepreneur should want. As you start as an entrepreneur and you shift to being a professional, being a owner, first an operator owner, and then just an owner, right? Albeit maybe it's a piece of it, maybe it's just on the sale, and then you're done. But at the risk of alienating the entirety of people that listen. Entrepreneur is not necessarily the be all end all title you should seek to have. Maybe right. You start that way. You should always have that kind of spirit. I know I do. I label myself as one, but eventually you have to move on to that next piece. That's
right. And to be fair, and to your point, I think it's more of a state of mind, right? And a mindset. And so I don't think there's any right or wrong answer there. Just, what is your target? What are you aiming for? And so what we typically find is that, most of us will go into business for the income, and we completely misunderstand or overlook the outcome. And the outcome is the wealth that's trapped inside a company. And that wealth can very well create generational, a meaningful generational wealth for your children and your children's children. We've seen it. The other case study I wanted to share with you was a partnership of three folks in a healthcare business. And they're at a place where their third partner was the capital investor. He's looking to retire. And retirement for him means selling off all of his companies. So he just sold off one of his other companies outside of this partnership. He's now looking to exit this partnership. Relationships are great. There's nothing hostile. There's nothing, that's upsetting anyone in that arrangement. But what happens with entrepreneurs is in our early stages, we typically will bootstrap the business. We grow, we develop wealth, and then the irony is the wealth that is created over time, the perception is that the business is now risking the wealth due to the liability that the business has when you have a sole owner of a company, as an example. So now they're going into more asset protection mindset, which is, again, we talked about mindset earlier. This is the natural progression that we see. So this gentleman is focused on, creating that asset protection, exiting his investments, and then living off of the money that he's generated from the sales of these companies. But the other two partners in this business, they're in their mid 40s. They're nowhere near retirement. They still have children in school, elementary school. And so they want to continue to grow and scale. So in a situation like that, we'll go to market and we'll bring on what we call smart capital. Smart capital to us is someone that is more than just capital. They have a network or a Rolodex. I have to say both because not everyone knows what a Rolodex is, right? so we learn with our interns. But then also those capital providers, they do have a playbook, and they do have access to talent. If they need a parachute in a CFO, they will. A COO, they will. A new CEO, they will. All focused on continuing the growth and development of that company. And at some point in some stage, once this transaction is completed, there will be another subsequent transaction in 3 to 7 years after that capital provider has helped those business owners and operators triple the size of that company. Because for capital providers like private equity groups or family offices to come in and to get the internal rate of return, they need to triple the size of the revenues of that business. Because once they get to that critical mass, of course, profitability grows, but so does the multiples on the valuation.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I love that case study, Brian, because I think most people, when they think of partnerships, they view it as a business marriage, and they view the split when that inevitably comes at some point, right?
Mm-hmm.
As a business divorce, right? And most of the time when people think about that, it gets messy, right? But you're exactly right. It doesn't have to be, right? It doesn't have to be, as long as you have the proper strategy and you are ahead of that strategy, right? If you're raising your hand and, hey, within the next 30, 60, 90 days we want to sell, or I want to sell my portion out, you probably should have started that conversation a whole lot longer ago. So what is that right time frame, Brian? I mean, in your experience, at what point in a business's
Mm-hmm.
life cycle should the founders or partners start to explore what the exit looks like?
So I'll give a general response here. I mean, it's anywhere between 6 months to 3 years, and everything in between. It just really depends on, at times, like I said, we might not even have 6 months. I mean, the record transaction we've closed was in 28 days, but it was for good reason. We obviously would love to have more time, because what we typically see is the more time we do have, the better we could improve the business by reducing the perceptions of risk in that business, and filling in that gap that we were talking about earlier, right? Because what you can't do is you cannot sell a problem. So if you're selling your company and there's problems knowingly in your business, you can't expect those just to go away by way of a sale or a merger. Those are just going to get magnified, quite honestly, because once you go into that due diligence process, it's going to be revealed in detail. But let's just say, generally speaking, 6 months to 3 years is when we want to engage with the client and lay forth a plan with them.
And what? So I appreciate that. I mean, and I know it's going to be different for every owner in every industry.
Yes.
Outside of that time frame, starting the conversation, what are some things that business founders should be thinking about day one, right, or year one, when they're seeing the trajectory, they're having success in business, they have their operations locked in, they've got their vision for the future. What are some activities or some things that they need to be aware of right in that first beginning stage of business?
So this is my problem with business plans that people can download online, right? Those business plans are great at, giving you template projections and template org charts, and those are needed. Don't get me wrong. But what those business plans don't have is an exit plan. And
Mm.
when it doesn't have an exit plan, I mean, none of us go into a building without taking notice to where the exit signs are. No one goes, I mean, an airplane won't even lift off until, by federal regulation, until everyone knows clearly where the exits are, right? I mean, you've been on a plane and you know
Oh
that
yeah.
drill and routine. So I think it's important for entrepreneurs and owners to look at, have that end in mind. Yes, go into a business. Yes, thrive and grow and challenge yourself. But where do you intend to be? If that's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years down the road, where do you intend to be? And so what we can do and what we provide for those types of clients is we created what we call as a Meritage stock ticker. It's fun. We're not taking anyone public, but it's an internal measurement, and we could do these every year through our assessments and valuations. And we show our clients exactly how their businesses are performing over time in terms of enterprise value. So
Well,
that's a great tool.
I love that, and regardless of whether or not you have the intention of going public, you said it earlier in the conversation today.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you have a mindset of that, right? Why wouldn't you, be thinking about that even if you're a private company? Because that measure is also an indication of your health as a business.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And there's two ways in which our clients typically go public. One, yes, they'll file for an IPO and head that route. The other way is through M&A strategies where they're selling their companies to public companies, and in those transactions, there are opportunities for them to, uh, um, in lieu of cash, they could take on public stock of the acquiring group or the merging group, which gives them options and tools and possibilities that they wouldn't otherwise have as a privately held company.
That's huge, right? Yeah, you talk about
Yeah.
leaving a legacy, right? Having
Yes.
multi-generational wealth. It's just one of many other strategies to get that
Yeah.
done. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Brian, I've had a great conversation. I really appreciate you sharing those case studies. Two very different stories, but they
Yeah.
show two very different pictures of how an exit strategy might come to fruition. And I know we could talk all day about business. We could talk guitars. We could talk, anything we wanted to. But I also want to make sure I'm giving you an opportunity to highlight the business. If somebody wants to do one of those assessments, if they feel like they're at that point in business where that makes sense, what would be the best way for them to reach out, and how do they know if they're at that tipping point to reach out to you guys?
Yeah. So absolutely. So they could reach out to us. Our website is meritage-partners.com. We also have the domain meritage.partners. So they could reach out to us there. And we do have some form fills where they can reach out to us, schedule a discovery call, and I'm so sorry, an exploratory call to see where they're at and determine whether or not we need to move forward now or at some point in the future. The beauty is we could equip them with tools and data on their specific industry. We could provide them some guidance in and around what are the trends in their industry? What should they be aware of, right? Even if they're not ready for an exit today, you need to be mindful of that movement, depending on what industry you're in, right? So, but they could also reach out. I mean, you could find us on LinkedIn. My prefix, I believe, is Brian T. Franco on LinkedIn. So you'll find us if you look up Meritage Partners or Brian T. Franco. My team will schedule time for that exploratory call, and we'll decide what the next best step is, and we'll take that step with the clients.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you so much again, Brian, for your time, the value you poured into our audience, and look, if you're not there yet, if you're not to that point in business, guess what? You're on the right track. You're here. You're listening to this conversation. You're being learning based. You're whether you're driving to and from your next appointment, your next closed deal, whatever that may be. Make sure that you guys keep that entrepreneurial spirit alive out there, and that you're listening to other good content from great people like Brian that can give you a path forward. So, and I've got to do all the podcast stuff, as you guys know. If you enjoyed the conversation, make sure you reach out to Brian. Make sure that you rate us. Let us know. Give us some feedback. We love hearing from listeners on the stories of business that they've heard and how it's been impacting their business in real time. So if you have a story to share from an episode that you listened to or this episode, please tell me. I really love hearing those. And until next time, make sure that you guys keep that entrepreneur spirit alive, that you're out there seeking your passions and building the legacy for the future. And we'll just tune in next time for another great conversation in business. Brian, again, thank you for your time. Appreciate you, sir.
Thank you, Brian. Yes.
Yeah.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. My pleasure.